Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. I see Maria just testing that you can hear me. We were not talking yet. But if you can drop your name and your org in the chat, we'll let people are still trickling in. So we'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Susan Ortiz. I am the program director here at HAND. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with HAND or new to HAND, we are a nonprofit membership association of affordable housing and community development professionals like yourselves. Our members span from Richmond to Baltimore, covering, like we like to say, anyone who has a hand in housing is a member of HAND. So architects, engineers, resident service providers, developers, lawyers, bankers, anyone who's at a ribbon cutting, they're a member of HAND. So you're in great company. We host several training and capacity building events like today's session throughout the year. These include a variety of technical topics like Year 15, soft skills trainings like negotiations, as well as networking events. I do want to take a quick moment to plug that our biggest networking event of the year is exactly 1 week from today. So next Thursday, June 13th, is the 33rd Annual HAND Honors happening at the Kennedy Center from 6 to 9 p.m. So this event is a great opportunity for you to connect with other professionals in the space, and we'll also be recognizing industry accomplishments that have happened over the last year with our Housing Achievement Awards. And we'll also be presenting our second annual Generation HAND Scholarship and our Children's Essay Contest winner, which are always the highlights of the evening. For more information on that, you can go to handhousing.org. And as soon as we wrap up here, I'll drop a link in the chat as well if you guys are interested in attending. So we hope to see all of you there. Now back to why we're here today. Hopefully you all are here for the Year 15 transition. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. We have a great group of experts ready to walk you through the different things you need to consider before, during, and beyond that 15-year mark. I want to thank CohnReznick, our program sponsor for the day. We value your partnership and your support in making sessions like today's possible. So before we get started, I do want to pass it over to Marshall Phillips, who will be joining our panel today from CohnReznick to provide a few opening remarks. Thanks, Marshall.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Marshall Phillips, I'm a partner with CohnReznick. CohnReznick is a national accounting firm with close to 4,000 employees. We work across sort of all aspects of affordable housing nationally. We cover everything from the developer side, sponsor side, up to the investors, transactions, valuation, audit, tax, just a very wide variety of accounting services. And we've got a team of give or take 650 professionals that focus on affordable housing nationally. So this is a massive practice for us. It really stems from David Resnick's work with HUD years ago, and then evolved with the Tax Act of 1986. We've been part of this program and the financing of affordable housing in the US really since its inception. So we are happy to sponsor this event and enjoy our partnership with HAND and look forward to the session today.
Thank you, Marshall. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. Today, we will have a presentation of a case study from Mary Claire with AHC, and then we'll get into our panel discussion. The chat is enabled for you all, so if you have questions throughout today's session, please feel free to drop them in there. Do keep in mind, we have time allotted for Q&A after Mary Claire's case study, as well as after our panel. But if it's something you think you might forget, or if we want me to flag to stop them in that moment, we can put those in the chat and I can keep an eye on that to make sure if we need to jump in and get those questions answered, or we can save them to the end. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Mary Claire to kick us off today. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Mary Claire Davis. I'm with AHC, also known as Affordable Homes and Communities, and I'm happy to be here today and ready to jump in and give you the developer's perspective on approaching Year 15 and talk you through actually 2 case studies. So next slide. So AHC, we've been around for nearly 50 years. We're a nonprofit, mission-driven affordable housing developer working throughout the Mid-Atlantic. We have more than 8,000 homes, mostly affordable, and we really have a huge focus on services for our community and have a CORE certified resident services program. Next slide. I'm here today really to give the developer's perspective on how to approach life after year 15. I will not be your technical tax expert. That will be in our panel later with Marshall and others, but I wanted to give the perspective of how, from a development side of the shop, we look at year 15 approaching and going forward. And for us at AHC, we've been around a while, so the year 15 community is very much a material part of our organizational management, and that is very much a part of our development pipeline. We have about 16 communities that are past year 15 within our portfolio, but we've only recapitalized 4 of them so far in new tax credit transactions. And that means we consider a number of questions if we want to move it forward to a new redevelopment. We are also considering about 5 communities right now in some form of pre-development that may or may not turn into a major redevelopment or recapitalization. But the questions we consider are, first, do we have a clear path for investor exit? We want them, our good friends, out before we do something new. We also look and see, is there some sort of a financing deadline looming? Does your First Trust mortgage align with year 15 or in the few years after, so that you need to consider at a minimum some type of refinancing play? The other thing we really look at is there redevelopment potential? Is this an opportunity to do more, add units, change things about the community materially, add impact to the affordability crisis? And then we also look at, are there significant capital needs? Does this community need a renovation, or did we build it 15 years ago and it's good with an ongoing capital plan for the community? And we also look at, are there any unmet resident needs? Is there a different type of units that are needed? Are there energy improvements that are needed? Do we need to really consider community space and other, amenities at the community? And then I'm going to say this once here, and I'm going to say it again later. Please engage trusted legal and accounting counsel. Developers should not go down this path on their own. You need to consider it at the beginning, during, later, and in the future. And so please find and utilize great advisors, of which many are hand members, and to do that going forward. So next slide. The first community I want to talk about is our Apex community that used to be called the Berkeley. This was 137 homes in 2 1960s era buildings in Arlington County on the Alexandria border along 4 Mile Run. What happened with the Berkeley is AHC purchased it, did a 4% tax credit renovation in the early 2000s. But by year 11, we found a significant CapEx needs, unusual CapEx needs, and some of them were concerning. They were structural, and those weren't evident when we purchased the property. And so we really thought, we've got an issue here. And so we started working on this many years before our year 15 exit. And first, we looked at, okay, what will it take to renovate this? And because of some of these issues, the costs were so high, the complexity was so much, we thought, well, is this an opportunity to start fresh? And the real opportunity was, there was a density potential. So that's something I encourage everybody to look at with their year 15. Has something changed where you are? Is there a priority that's changed? Is there an opportunity to do more? This coincided with the rise of the twinning 9%, 4% transactions. So that helped make redeveloping 2 buildings more feasible for us. And then, for this community, we were able to turn 137 homes into 2 new buildings with 256 new homes. So that was 119 added committed affordable homes in a very high cost area. So one of our fun questions was, so I'll answer for you now if anybody wants to know, is we said we want to get ahead of this. Virginia Housing, at the time there was VHDA, can we apply for tax credits before the end of year 15? And they said, well, we say yes if the IRS says yes. Well, the IRS says no. So don't anybody waste any time unless rules change. They said, do not apply for new tax credits before the end of your 15 years. So saving you all some time on that. Next slide. So I don't want to offend anyone who has a fondness for 1960s era brick squares, but the photos above are what the Berkeley used to look like, and the photos are below are what we were able to achieve. So we're really proud of this. 2 new beautiful buildings in a great location, you know, nearly 50% increase in affordability, affordable units in this location. They're modern, they're efficient, they have community space. We actually turned parking lots into green space with underground parking. There's community gardens and play areas, and we kind of look at this as the ultimate year 15 opportunity. Next slide. So not without a lot of challenges. A couple special circumstances on this one. Relocation, which is a factor anytime you're going to renovate a community, but we were going to demolish a community. So this was really considered a permanent relocation for our existing residents because of the time they'd be off-site. So they would be moved off-site for more than 2 years, of course, with a right to return, but that required a lot of planning, a lot of buy-in from all the different, the county, the state, our residents, a lot of communication, a lot of expertise that we had to rely on. And so that was a huge part of the overall redevelopment plan. We had bonds on this property that had a very sort of strict timing schedule that, you know, you had to give X notice, it had to be on X day, and you had to do it then. And as everybody knows, with tax credit closings, they often are moving, and it was a 9/4 and a twinning. And we had this ever moving closing date. So we had to make the decision to establish a bond payoff ahead of the tax credit closing. That just added another financing piece to an already very complicated transaction, but it was something we had to consider in order to really transition this community. Our investor exit wasn't straightforward on this one. We had a large negative capital account that really influenced the exit negotiations. This ended up being, to date, our second largest LP exit price that we had to pay. We were able to negotiate it down in that process, but it was a large dollar amount, and we had to make a decision as an organization that we'd do this because this redevelopment was going to create so much more. And this was a case that the syndicator was not the same at the exit as they were at the beginning. And that's something a lot of developers are facing now when organizations merge and change leadership or are folded and acquired by others. And so that's something that has really influenced how we look at new deals today, is having gone through the process of not having the same partner at the end as we started. Next slide. The next case study I wanted to highlight was one that was a little more straightforward, but had some nuances. And this was our Colonial Village West community, also in Arlington County. We had purchased and syndicated with a moderate renovation in 2002. One of the big nuances here was this is an historic community. So most of our buildings were from the 1930s. We did have one newer building, very well located to metro, shopping, employment in Arlington. This was also a community that was supported by a project-based rental subsidy. So we were able to serve very low-income households in this really transit-oriented location. The community did need a significant renovation, so that's what really pushed us to look at a recapitalization. We also really wanted to create community space for resident services there where we had none before. And a key component was figuring out a way to get below market rents up to market. And when we were successfully able to do that, it really opened up the possibility to do a significant renovation at this community. This is something that's listed on the National Register of Historic Places and also a county designated historic area. It's part of a larger garden style community with a great walk score, but really put some parameters on what we could do and not do at year 15. Next slide. Special circumstances here. Again, relocation, which is always a significant component. There were some added elements here where we had many residents with long tenure, so that makes relocation efforts a little more sensitive and challenging. We also had about 20% of our residents were seniors, were elderly. And so that takes a extra special care in relocation where we contemplated in place. It ended up being off-site. You also had the HUD layer, which requires additional relocation elements as well. We always recommend that that's a good plan ahead, communication. It can be an unsettling process for residents. The HUD contract here was, not a going in, not an automatic where we would end up on renegotiating a new contract and new rents. We were in the end very successful in getting the rents up to market where they needed to be. And that really helped us, but that was not a foregone conclusion going into it. Here on our investor exit, we had a really collaborative limited partner. It was a nominal cost to exit and really very much easy process. And so I'll sort of note that this is, again, something that's factored into our decisions now is a lot of these exits we've gone through in the last 10 years or so sometimes influences the partners we select next. Next slide. So here's sort of my summary advice and some of the lessons we've learned and our strategies as we've tackled this. Again, trying to now incorporate very clear investor exit terms in our LPAs. Some of our older deals, it wasn't as easy. And so you learn a lot as an organization that grows over many decades. We now include our preferred language on these terms in our financing RFPs. So when we ask investors to consider investing in our deals, we ask for them to agree to these terms as part of the RFP process, well ahead of negotiating a limited partnership agreement. We also work really hard to work on early LP exits if we can, because that just really frees us up to move forward with our refinancing choices, our actions to go forward or not go forward. I will say in the last couple of years, we have had to refinance an asset or two where the investor isn't out, and that is an extra layer of complication that you just really don't want to have. So I encourage folks to plan for that ahead of time. Also advise that you have a really comprehensive sense of the capital needs of your community. You are tracking that along the 15 years and you really have a sense of what it needs and doesn't need. And so that can really tell you whether you have to act or not after year 15. And really consider whether zoning or jurisdictional priorities might allow you to do something different. Can you make the year 15 opportunity into something more? We all know there's a housing crisis. A lot of hand communities are very well located in places where we need more affordable housing. And can we use this as a chance to do more? I'll say it again about relocation planning. Start early, establish a comprehensive plan, use third-party help if you don't have the internal help. We have done that on a number of occasions where we have relied on experts who are not part of the AHC staffing or our property management partners. And for us, that has really helped to have that extra expertise. And then encourage your ongoing monitoring of your capital accounts and know well ahead where you may have issues or not. And again, I'll repeat my advice from before, which is engage trusted legal and accounting counsel and bring them into every phase of starting, finishing, and next steps after year 15. So next slide, I think is my end. This is my contact information. I know we have some time for questions. Please don't ask me the questions for Marshall and save them for him. But I'm happy to answer any questions folks have.
Thank you, Mary Claire. We have a couple questions in the Q&A box. Everyone feel free to keep dropping your questions in the chat or the Q&A. But the first one we have, is there a time threshold for temporary moves versus permanent?
That's a fantastic question. And I think that there is, and I don't remember exactly what that is. Most of our renovations are anywhere from say a month to 6 months at the longest. But I would say in recent memory, our temporary relocations have been 2 to 3 months off-site. Or on another part of the property if we're able to do that. So definitely 2+ years qualified for that, but I don't remember offhand if there is a technical time limit on that.
Thank you. And then another question we have is, how did you all cover the costs for the new resident services?
That's been a combination of things. If we can figure out a way to get it into the operating expenses, that's great. We also try to collect a fee that often gets below the line. We do a tremendous amount of fundraising, grant writing, appeals. If you ever get anything from HC that says, please donate, it's not for development, it's for resident services. So I would say it's a very comprehensive stew. Some localities we work in have a lot of program partnerships we can rely on. So sometimes if you can create the space, you find the partner that then can provide the services who needs the space. We've done that a number of places where we have collaborated with folks who are doing daycare or preschool or Montessori programs. So not a simple answer. I will say the majority of our tax credit developments do not provide the resources in the operating budget to cover comprehensive services, unfortunately.
A mystery everyone's trying to solve. Aisha, I hope those answered your questions. Do we have any other questions for Mary Claire right now? As she mentioned, we will have time after the panel as well if you have other questions outside of
So
the.
I'll just chime in with a comment, and I didn't get to see those when we were doing our prep. Those are great case studies. And I almost think that we could leave them up on the screen and they could guide some of our conversations during this event. But the relocation plan, I think is a really, something to maybe spend some time on, for those that are thinking about taking this on. I mean, that is a process in itself, right? And trying to figure out how you're going to just manage those logistics. And it sounds like you've got a good team and a lot of experience around you, but I almost feel like there are times where people just get so focused on how do we get this investor out? How do we get our hands back on the asset, that they're ignoring the fact that there's really a whole other business plan that needs to be created and managed and financed, and that's going to have to happen sort of almost at the same time or subsequent to this exit transaction. And I'm not sure that folks always appreciate what goes into that and keep their eye on that ball.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Particularly for the transaction where people were leaving for 2 years. I mean, we worked on that for several years ahead of time, meeting with residents, Arlington County, plug for them, great partner on relocation. And they at times had resources to help with relocation. You have residents who need to find places. So you need to find a place for them to be for a while. They might have a voucher, some do, and then those are extra considerations. Or we need to find somewhere that is affordable. And if not, you've got a budget for offsetting the costs that you might need to find places for folks to go where you are in high cost areas. So it's a cost implication. It's a huge planning implication and lots of legal rules regarding relocation, particularly if you have any federal dollars involved regarding legal notices and folks' rights throughout the process. So you could probably do a whole session on relocation.
Yeah, so this is our world. So I happen to go to a lot of affordable housing conferences, and I was at one yesterday. And I heard a comment on a panel that was mentioning relocation costs that I was not aware of, that there's almost a cottage industry that's popping up with consultants who really focus on managing, sort of taking the relocation planning off of your plate. Of course, they
Mhm.
charge a fee for that, and it's not cheap. I wasn't sure. It sounded like it was I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina. So this was North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, probably a little bit, few other states focused group. And they were specifically talking about some of the states in the South. Has that come up in y'all's world up, in Virginia?
Yeah, we have definitely used third party. The Berkeley was probably the first one we did use third party because we thought it was such a significant relocation effort, being, 2+ years permanent, needing to get the property completely vacated on a schedule to lead to demolition and new construction. So we used that the first time and then found that it was valuable to us, and on many of our relocations since, we have used third party. So there are a handful of consultants I know of in working in the Baltimore DC region, and probably more, but I think it's, everybody should look at their own internal structure, whether you have affiliated property management, whether you use third-party partners, whether any of those have that capacity. But I would recommend everybody consider that they have the right team, and to do that right for the purposes of your development, but to also do right by your residents, because it's an unsettling process for folks to have to move, particularly if they've been in their home for a very long time. Even if it means they'll have a brand new everything at the end, it's unsettling and stressful. How will my kids get to school? What if I can't be where my shopping is? What will happen with my stuff? Can I come back to my same apartment? Once you've done a few of them, a lot of the questions, but it's really hard. I mean, just think, who likes moving? So
Yeah,
then
and
you might ask somebody to move twice in a year.
Sounds
I
like
was just
we
gonna say,
have,
Mark. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
sorry, I
Susan.
was just gonna say, sounds like we have a really good idea for a next session on relocation. I did want to go ahead and pass it over to Stephanie. So it seems like everyone's eager to get this conversation started. So I'd love to hear from everybody. I'm gonna go off camera and let Stephanie, our moderator, take it away, and you guys can go from there. Thank you.
Yeah, no, perfect. I was literally gonna add to that. I think that this is a good segue into year 15. I think that obviously the case studies did add a lot of value to Marshall's point, so we might touch a little bit on that. We have some questions that we're thinking through, but obviously add your questions for Q&A. This is meant to be very much collaborative, so that if there are specific issues that you're facing, obviously let's talk about it. But we want to make sure that we're talking about, there's a lot of different ways to do relocation. We can talk that through. And I know some folks, if you're adding a building, they'll, move folks to the new building and then, have some transition there, especially when you're adding units. So lots of different ways to talk about that. But I want to make sure that we stay focused on year 15 and some of those challenges, because there are so many, Mary Claire, you spoke about, in just a few case studies. So just imagine how many properties are actually transitioning and how many challenges folks that don't have Mary Claire's experience, and obviously a lot of maybe missight or misunderstanding of their loan documents and kind of what you're facing and how early on you actually have to consider the long-term play on your properties. So with that being said, I will transition us to, in a fun way, a little bit of an icebreaker, because we didn't get a chance to introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Pierre-Louis. I work for National Equity Fund, which is a not-for-profit tax credit syndication shop, and we're national. I specifically cover the Mid-Atlantic, which, as we all know, is a very high-cost market. So different challenges there. But I wanted to ask the panelists your why in housing, and if not your why, just the how you ended up housing. And I'll start. I ended up in affordable housing as an analyst right out of college in 2006, and because I volunteered with financial literacy and really saw the need with folks that were trying to figure out, how do I buy a house? How do I get from where I am now to where I want to be? And the huge gaps that families were facing, and obviously being securely housed is a huge impact on families. And it's one of the pillars of obviously a good community, and a strong community is good education, but being housed is critical. So that's my why, and I will pass it over to Shola, who obviously has not been able to introduce herself, and then please introduce the next panelist when you're finished.
Okay. Hi, I'm Shola Giwa. I work for National Housing Trust. We have a good number of our portfolio in DC, but also across the Mid-Atlantic. I lead the asset management team at National Housing Trust. My why or how for housing, my first job was as a staff accountant for a property management company that specialized in affordable housing, and that's how I discovered the world of affordable housing. But my why is really, as an asset manager, it allows me to use my education, my technical skill sets, but I also feel that I am directly impacting people's lives every day. So it feeds my soul and also satisfies my brain. So that's why I am in affordable housing and asset management specifically. And I think I'm going to pass it to Marshall
Sure.
To introduce himself.
Yeah, and I touched on this a little bit. Again, Marshall Phillips, a partner with CohnReznick, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I would say the why for me, first of all, I didn't really know what I was getting into when I joined CohnReznick. I didn't really appreciate the way affordable housing is financed in the US. I come from a deal background and other types of assets. And so it was really eye-opening. And, you know, I alluded to David Resnick, who was a mentor to me. And one of the things he used to say was, you know, part of what we're here for is, you know, we're doing good for others while we're also, you know, doing something good for ourselves as we, you know, have a career here at this firm. And I really do believe in that. I've also just, my eyes have been opened over the 20 or so years that I've been working in affordable housing, being at events and meeting developers who are just exceptional at what they do. And I think I've just really had the opportunity to see how stable housing changes lives. And I think it's a really interesting sort of offshoot of what we do. And it's almost really the most important thing. And so all of us here on this presentation are involved in, you know, how these deals get financed and how they're developed. And we worry about the day-to-day, but I think the stability that comes to a family from having safe, affordable housing is something that is, you know, really easy to fall back on, and to kind of take a moment and pause and think about what we do in this industry. That's really the good that comes out of this. And that I like that aspect of our jobs, really collectively in this industry. So I'll pass it over to you, to Mary Claire.
Marshall, again, I'm Mary Claire Davis with AHC, and my sort of housing origin story is with a little wryness. I say I was a real estate nerd as a kid. So I was weirdly fascinated by the real estate section, the classifieds. I would read the Washington Post Saturday real estate section. I'd circle houses for my parents, like, why don't we move here? It has a front porch. And I loved those magazines at the grocery store that had the house plans in them. And I was like, oh, you know, this would be my room, and that, you know, I started this weird fascination. And then in college, I was at a school that didn't have architecture, engineering, or anything like that, but I participated in a spring break program for a few years where we worked in Johns Island, South Carolina, with some really cool nuns who helped do house repairs for folks in a very rural area. And so we would go every spring break and hammer nails and build ramps and do things like that. And so it sort of sparked this, you know, idealistic, you know, what can I do in the world? And I just sort of figured out the housing mesh up, and then stumbled my way through it since.
Well, thank you. Thanks for everyone for sharing that. I think that's really important. And it shows folks how vast, right, of the reason folks get into this industry and how incredibly insightful people can be coming from those backgrounds. So we really appreciate that. I just want to start off by, obviously piggybacking off of Mary Claire's presentation, but really, I feel like current market conditions have shifted tremendously. And I want to understand, and hopefully for the other folks listening, how that has changed the execution of your 15-year strategy, specifically about 15 years, but taking consideration all the changes that have been happening. And I will start with Marshall.
Yeah, I think going back to those two case studies, I feel like highlighted a ton, or they were just under the surface. There were all the issues that we're probably going to cover and then some. I would say, so we do a lot of this. We see transactions all over the US. So I might have maybe a wider data set than some others who work regionally. And so I do have the sort of the benefit of seeing what's going on in a bunch of different markets. I don't feel like things have changed that much, other than I do feel like the sponsor side has gotten much more adept at understanding what this transaction or potential transaction could be. Gone are the days of us getting phone calls from I'm just going to say, sponsor, developer, the owner, the general partner, sort of all of that group in one as sort of one collective type of phone call or client for us. The days of why doesn't this LP just go away for $1,000? We used to get those phone calls, so that mindset has really changed. And also, I think understanding the value of the assets that underlie the projects and the sort of ownership structure, you're talking about sort of two things. You're talking about the asset, and you're talking about a partnership that has its own documents that really govern things, and you have to look at those documents. So I would say that the sponsor side is coming to us more prepared. That would be my sort of market change if I had to pick one. Maybe 1A would, obviously all of this has to be paid for somehow. So the interest rate environment is certainly affecting the way the teams are approaching this, or maybe it's putting some things on hold because they're not able to get the same type of financing that they thought could make that plan, that sort of underlying business plan that I alluded to, that again was implied in Mary Claire's slides, that are the offshoot of getting one of these transactions done. That's what comes to mind for me in terms of the change to the quote unquote market for these transactions.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add.
Yeah, I would say on that interest rate issue, we're all facing that with deals we want to do anything with. But, I've got one community that in my sort of questions earlier of do we do this or do not do this, is we had a community that needed a refinancing because of a mortgage product it had a repayment time frame, but we weren't ready to do any major renovation or recapitalization. That refinance was sub 3% and it's due in 2026. And so we have to do something then, but that's a very different landscape than when we did the initial refinance. I mean, we all enjoyed this lovely period of low interest rates, and a lot of our deals are predicated on that. And so that's a serious concern for us on the interest rates. And then I'd also say, just the cost of doing business has increased so much in the last few years. And so when you're considering a renovation with new tax credits, pricing is down, costs are up, and that's a harder solution to find for those communities that really do need a renovation.
I guess I would
Yes.
just add, from an asset management point of view, I think I agree with everything that has been said. I especially enjoyed Mary Claire's first slide, and because my mantra is, when you attend year 15 seminars, they tell you start at year 10. My mantra is that it starts at year 1, right? When you inherit the property from a development, trend your property. When you trend your property every year or every quarter, or however often you do it, over year 15, over year 30 years, it allows you to plan for all eventualities. And what we're seeing now, as Marshall and Mary Claire has pointed out, is that the high interest rate environment might mean, and or the scarcity of soft public funding might mean a longer holding period. So yes, you have year 15. Is there an option period after year 15? So they don't necessarily have to get out at year 15, but the important thing is have a business plan that addresses the needs of the particular asset and the environment that you are in.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think, Mary Claire, you talked on this. I mean, it's really about knowing your market, knowing your deal. It is so different, deal to deal, where it's located, the costs, watching it operationally, right? When we think about whether or not a property can support the debt it has, and recapitalization doesn't always just mean you're going to be able to do a lot of renovations. Maybe it's like, my property has been struggling for a few years, and I need to build up some reserves to basically make sure that this is of a going concern, right? And I think that some people think year 15 means I'm going to redo the property, it's all going to look beautiful, we're relocating tenants, and that's not always the case. So there's definitely a lot of challenges around that. So I would say, speaking to Shola, obviously your asset management background, how do you determine whether or not, you're going to be able to recapitalize the property or if it's the right time for that property? When you look at year 15, you're thinking, okay, you've talked about it, you've talked it through. What are those determining factors that make the difference?
The funding environment, right? So, 4% bonds are very competitive. How many rounds is this property going to have to go through in order to get a bond at that location? And also, what's the priority of your local jurisdiction, right? Are they prioritizing preservation, as in existing properties, or are they, prioritizing new deals? Therefore, your property will not score high enough for some of the soft debt, and we've talked about interest rates. So one of the things that, we're thinking about is, maybe it's a bridge loan for a few years until, interest rates go down, and allowing for the multiple application rounds that are going to occur. And, and then some other things that we are considering, which, it's difficult to say because this has not been, the position of sponsors, especially nonprofit sponsors. Are we really the best owner of an operator of this property? Should we consider a sale? And in order to, and then you funnel the proceeds into your mission, right? So those are the things that we are considering. But when I alluded to it begins in year 1, there's, one of our properties which had just come out of construction was delayed because of the pandemic. And because of that, the development expense was a lot larger, like to the tune of $4 million. And when we did the projections for the capital account, we looked at it and understood that the capital account would probably go negative in year 9 or year 10. So negotiating with the investor limited partner about how you handle the losses to slow that down, and also negotiating an option for early exits because there's no point in them hanging on if all it's going to result in increased negative capital accounts and of course the impact on the exit taxes that you would have to pay. So those are some of the things that have come up, I think, just in this special times that we are in.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And Mary Claire, you spoke to this about even earlier than year one, right? We're talking your LOI, right? And you're basically in your RFP naming for folks what the terms are you're comfortable with, given your experience, negative or positive, with other partners that you've worked with. What are some of those hot topics that you think are really critical for folks to consider? Again, given the current market, but also, you know, for your organization and what you're facing.
Yeah, so in partnership with our legal counsel, we, put together what our right of first refusal and option agreement it will be. And we include that as an attachment when we put out an RFP for investors. And so there's sort of some buy-in on that. And we've worked with some investors multiple times, so that's not always a new thing to folks to consider. So that's important. We have, I will have to say, named entities that we don't want to work with and that we don't want our properties transferred to over the course. We've been lucky enough that none of our assets are with what I consider there are some bad actors out there in the last few years that have made nonprofits' ability to purchase and exercise their right of first refusal more difficult, given that the assets are in, high cost areas and have really appreciated. And so we try to stay on top of that and work that into our agreements that, we can't control what a syndicator is going to do in 5 years with their business necessarily, but we can try to control who it goes to later. So those are some of the things we've tried to be a little more savvy about over time.
Yeah, I think that's
Add
important.
to that, Stephanie.
Yeah, please, Marshall. Go ahead.
One of the things Mary Claire is talking about there is understanding how much, what the value of these assets really are, like almost week to week, I would say. Because if you're in this business and you're not aware of the sophistication level of the investors who, again, we love, they provide $28 billion or so in capital into these programs every year, and we would not exist without them. However, they're also they've got a business to run too, and they've got to understand what those assets are worth, and they've got massive amounts of data. Obviously, we know where the investor capital is a lot of times coming from banks who've got sophisticated lending arms, and again, just a ton of knowledge. And so if you as a sponsor are not sort of aware of that, or making yourself sort of getting yourself up to speed as to what your asset may be worth and what the drivers are, and sort of, talking to brokers or doing your best to get your hands on the data, you could come to the table sort of not having quite the arsenal, if you will, at your fingertips that you should, and that frankly your counterparty and what ultimately could become or will become a negotiation of some type, and just knowing what that underlying asset is worth, I think is just it's a really important data point to consider as you evaluate this whole year 15 approach.
That's really important. I think Mary Claire talked about that as well. Exit taxes, right? What it costs for you to exit and how you're watching capital count. Are there intervals of time that you're suggesting, Marshall? I know you said every day, keep up with the value, but that's just not realistic, right? Like, what is a real interval that folks like? Is it every, 1 year, 5 years, then 10 years you're reviewing, or are you looking at it every year and who are the partners that developers can reach out to, or those expert people that could lend the hand that maybe, you're not going to have the expertise of a bank, but also you have plenty of folks that can be on your team that is providing that level of expertise?
Yeah, I'm biased because we do this. We've got very experienced tax teams and audit teams that that are aware of the issues. And I would say, I mean, Shola alluded to it, projecting the capital accounts in terms of the way the partnership economics are expected to behave and impact each of the partners. It's a very important step in this process. Of course, the accountant in the room is going to say that, but having that sort of view and knowledge of what your the capital account is how they are expected to behave given current circumstances in combination with the value of the asset, that implies, what I would call a theoretical or a liquidation that could occur, and sort of understanding how the proceeds would flow, and that impacts the value that the LP is expecting for their position in the partnership. So all of those things work together. I do think it's a reasonable ask to, at least annually start, understand what the asset's worth. I mean, there are brokers out there. I mean, I get emails probably multiple times a day with, activities that's happening. It's very easy to get yourself on those email lists and talk to those that are active in your market, just so you're seeing cap rates and assets that are up for sale, and you can see it by door, you can see it by some other metric that might translate into some sort of even if it's just a back of the envelope sense of what your asset is worth, trying to get your hands on that data and get a sense, and then combine it with some of the other metrics that we're talking about here, so that what this playing field is going to look like when you start to go discuss it with your LP.
Yeah,
The only thing that I would add
Excellent.
is, I mean, everybody has to produce an REO schedule. And so using your NOI and understanding what the cap rate is to estimate value is, at least on a quarterly basis, that's something that can be done in-house. And we do, I'm sure everyone does regularly. As well as, all of the methods that Michelle has, and that, for me, it's also part of sort of like asset management 101. Yeah, you want to optimize operations so that NOI is maximized, which increases the value, of your property, which just allows you, more leverage when you come to year 15 and you're trying to negotiate.
yeah, that's a good point. And so, just naturally, you said there's REOs, there's challenge properties. You decide as an organization when you want to exit, and the impacts of that on the REO, and obviously the liquidity level of you as a not-for-profit. But can you speak to how you determine that, whether or not you're the right organization, and then basically what that determining factor is of if you're going to sell that property in the REO to basically impact, because obviously that's a huge market dynamic right now that we're seeing across the board, with some challenges.
I will say that, first of all, this is something that we are beginning to get our hands around. Because as a sponsor, as a nonprofit developer, you go into these properties and you think you're going to hold them forever. You have a mission, and you feel that you've made promises to your stakeholders, including the residents and the community in which your properties are placed. But there are some stock, outside of your organization impacts that you have to consider. We all know what's happening with expenses, and we've had 3 years where income has essentially remained flat because of the pandemic, and you juxtapose that against sharply rising expenses. Especially, and I think, there's a vintage of properties that were acquired, and at that time, the thinking was, oh, come year 15, we'll be able to recapitalize. So maybe the initial rehab was not as strong as it should be. So you have properties that have huge capital needs, in an environment where there's limited funds to sort of, and so you have to think, are we the best holder? Are we really serving our residents, right? Is there another operator that could do this better than us? And what what are the opportunities that would come from the sale? So those are things that we are thinking about, because you hold a property that you cannot serve well, and then there's also reputational risk, right? So
Sure.
those are the things that we think, almost like, again, Mary Claire's list, right? What are the needs of the property? What are the residents' needs? And and it's not just residents, it's in a community. It's the community where the property is placed. And if we find that we can serve it properly, the assets, the people, and it's on our watch list, and we've been feeding it for many years, then then the hard decision comes that is it really the best business decision is a sale as opposed to a hold?
Yeah, and Mary Claire, I don't know if you had anything to add there, but I just wanted to make sure we touched on
Yeah.
that because it's more
I mean, I
challenging.
think, yes, a lot of those points resonate. And I really think it's a looming issue across the industry. And the rising expenses and coming out of the pandemic, ongoing issues with delinquency, no more rent relief. A lot of those issues affect so many developments, and a lot of nonprofit owners, I think, are particularly pinched on that. And I think it's a bigger question for states and localities to consider. Are there better tools to help with preservation going forward? Are there ways to be more flexible with reserves? I think a lot of us have multiple sources in our deals with different folks controlling whether we can and cannot get to our reserves. What can be above the line and below the line? Are there, for those of us who work in Maryland, where there are property expense caps when you're putting in your applications that only increased last year for the first time since I think I've been working in Maryland. And it's affecting all of us. And so yeah, it's definitely a factor in year 15. I mean, similarly, as a nonprofit, selling has never been in our calculus at all. We have sold assets, but it's usually been because of partnerships and someone else pushing that to happen. We're not there yet as an organization, but I mean, I think we have to all speak about it. And those are really good points about, does it just need a change that can bring in, a new financing that can really help? But it's a concern for us, absolutely.
Sure. And do you think that this has impacted the investment appetite? Right. And where, yeah. So
I mean, a
ripple
lot of
effect,
things are impacting the investment appetite. I mean, you can probably talk about it. I mean, we're all looking at pricing that's a lot lower on a recapitalization or a new project than we were used to. Same with interest rates. I do a lot of work in the Baltimore market, and I actually have something, projects where investors have said, well, we're overextended in Baltimore. So there are markets in this region where, there's CRA efforts, things that stalled for a long time, projects investors committed to 3-4 years ago that are having a hard time getting to the finish line. Now they're like, well, we can't take on anything new in Baltimore. That's just sort of one point in time.
Sure.
But
Yeah. I mean, yes, I can speak to price challenges and investor, but it's good to hear it from the developer side, because I think we have lots of folks from developers. I mean, we talked about the banking industry and all the great things that they do, but to your point, they do follow the interest rate environment, and obviously they're looking at yield and where you can invest those dollars. And CRA, obviously really drives where they invest those dollars. And what we found is many folks are not over investing where maybe historically they were willing to do that. Obviously, the tax appetite is also, tax reform was a huge impact to that, and whether or not that was something they could absorb, right? And so that's definitely been a challenge, and we're clearly seeing deals that are not necessarily pencil. But I think for the year 15 and where you are in trying to recapitalize is, again, it's just a challenge in what you're going to get out of it. What I think is good, maybe it's like the greenhouse gas initiative. There's some, some dollars there, but not maybe as easy for small projects, right? To really use those dollars if they're going to require Davis Bacon wages and the rest of it and increase costs at the same time. There has to be true gap fillers to really kind of get these deals going. I did have a question from the audience. So I want to make sure that we address that. The questions is, can you talk about the 15-year transition when the value is less than the debt and how you shift analysis based on that?
Yeah, I saw that question. I was actually wondering if in your situation, Mary Claire, on I think it was the Apex where you identified the capital needs that sounds like significant, the structural issues. Did that come into play? Because it looked like there was, an exit tax situation. I think you said, I was just wondering, did that, assuming that's got to impact the value, or if not, we can just make up a fact pattern that fits this.
Yeah, we didn't run into an issue on value on the recapitalization on that.
Okay.
We were luckily enough able to do that. The buyout was definitely more than we wanted to spend, but that didn't affect value. We weren't in that situation. We've had one asset where that was an issue. I didn't use it as an example because it's got so much weirdness. In that case, we had mark-to-market HUD debt, and so we were able to get that debt assigned to us as a qualified nonprofit, and then we could forgive that debt to get down to value. Not every asset has that opportunity.
Well, so
that's really our one experience.
That's where I was going to go with the debt comment, because if we're at a situation, we find ourselves at a point in time where the value of the asset doesn't exceed the debt. And so I would be looking at, and we all sort of agree on that. So I think you're talking about maybe that makes the discussions with the LP a little bit easier, and you sort of have to get them out. But now all of a sudden you're going to have to talk to your lender, I think, pretty quickly to figure out, all right, if we're going to take out this LP, are there, I don't know if there's, there could be covenants or some other thing, rights that the lender has that you need to be aware of. And we say this all the time, everybody focuses on reading the partnership agreement or the operating agreement, but make sure you look at your debt documents as well, because if now all of a sudden we're talking about getting, like, I'm not going to pick on the nonprofit a little bit here, but if the nonprofit doesn't have the balance sheet to assume a piece of debt, then you're talking about going out and finding another partner, or the guarantor sort of could matter. Again, I'm just going to try to make up a fact pattern that fits what I think the question is. So I think you're going to be spending your time focusing on the debt and how you sort of come out the other side. And maybe that makes the LP discussions easier. But to me, it's kind of becomes its own sort of, a heavier weight, if you will, in the overall equation, is figuring out how you're going to deal with that debt going forward if the property is upside down.
A lot of deals have, a lot of soft debt from, the states and localities that has not been paid. We're all victim to get the deal done, get the sources in to, build the property or renovate the property. And yeah, cash flow, soft debt is great. But when it comes 20 years later and you have more debt than you borrowed because you haven't really been able to materially bring down principal, you've got maybe interest accumulating, then the question, I think, maybe goes to your local partners and others as to kind of how can they participate. And I say we've had mixed success on that. Everybody's willing to resubordinate, but that doesn't resolve all your problems. And can some of these soft lenders be more flexible? I don't know. the
Right.
answer to that.
Yeah. So these subordinate debts or residual receipt loans, certainly the terms from the local jurisdiction, whether it's city or state, have hardened over the years. I still remember when they, in their documents, they would say the loan would be forgiven if in instances like this. But everybody's position has hardened because, people are looking for a return on their investments. So yes, it definitely, might require, again, a holding period where the focus is on, can you improve NOI? So can you improve value? As well as talking to all of the stakeholders that are involved. But yes, people are willing to resubordinate, people are willing to defer payments, but it's very hard to get a jurisdiction that's willing to walk away from their investment.
And I'm
Yeah.
also wondering, as you're speaking, Shola, maybe that's an indication of, maybe there is an operational issue, right? And so, and then back, I'm gonna keep going back to Mary Claire's slides. What if we're dealing with a different investor than we had? We didn't realize that the fund, the upper tier of the fund had changed, or that somehow this asset is not held by, or that investment is at LP interest is held by another player. And it could turn into, maybe they're looking for a replacement GP if things aren't going well. I mean, like you could be going down that slope and not realize it. If it's an operational issue that's driving the value of the asset down. So, which I didn't realize, I'm assuming that wasn't the case. I was kind of assuming it might be more, you just got a bunch of soft debt that's been accruing interest, and all of a sudden you're sort of upside down. But I still think you've got a slew of issues either way. When the asset value starts to decrease like that, the only potential upside I can think of is maybe the LP conversation gets easier, maybe.
Yes, yes, because then obviously if there's no value, at least that's part of my request when I'm asking them to forgive exit tax.
Right.
Increased capital needs, huge AR, blah, 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 blah. And
Might not change the exit tax number though, right? I mean, that's a hard one to negotiate. I think I saw where you guys, did allude to that, but I mean, that is one of the asks that's pretty standard, is that if they're negative and they've got to get back up to zero through, even if they're bought out for $1,000, they've still got a tax bill that you have to pay.
Well, my experience is that we've actually it's almost always yes. There are some actors that are very hard, some investors that are very hard, but then there are the mission-minded ones that think, well, we've gotten our credits, we've gotten the projected losses, and are willing to walk away. And I would say right now, I just got an email where I offered 30 cents on the dollar for the exit tax calculated, and the answer was yes. And it wasn't even a nonprofit investor, it was a for-profit investor. So,
and there's
that's
probably a
great, so-
relationship. There's probably a
Yeah.
relationship, capital there that comes into play, right? Because they want to,
yeah,
they don't
I
want to be
mean,
on the bad list of people.
they don't, exactly. And they do not want to be on the bad list, and
Sure.
are more amenable to things like that.
Yeah, and what I would say, and add to the bad actor conversation, is also states are, putting in their QAPs, right? Like you cannot have really challenged if a not-for-profit wants to buy, like they are literally trying to support not-for-profits wanting to buy the property, at 15-year transition. But it's important to know that is a critical point that you want to understand in your documents. I think the other thing is when, the thing about being notified if your investor has changed, like knowing that, right? Like there should be some conversations with your partner. Again, your partners are, there's a lot of partners at the end of the day on getting these deals done, but make sure you're staying on top of that. They should be notifying you if the investor has changed, put that in your loan documents, make sure that that's included there, because that is a huge change that could be a risk to the property, right? And you want to make sure that you are aware of that investor. And if you've had experience that, you know, quote unquote, makes them a bad actor, that's not somewhere you want to go. And so that pre-negotiation, even in the RFP stage, like Mary Claire said, becomes even more critical because you're saying you absolutely cannot transfer it to such and such.
And I would just add, so again, we talk about tracking your capital account, but you're tracking it, one, to know, you know what the balance is, but also to allow you to intervene. So when you're tracking and you see it's going negative, you can talk to your limited partner about switching the loss allocation. You know, and obviously the earlier you do it, the more of an impact that has. And then, as in the deal that I said was the construction expense, development expense came out to be a lot higher because of the pandemic. We were able to then enter an agreement where, even though the nonprofit does not need the losses, but most of the losses were assigned to the nonprofit in order to slow down the capital account as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more deals where, you know, obviously that's being a challenge penciling today. So knowing that there's going to be a reallocation of losses is important as well. Great. Is there any other questions from the audience? I want to make sure that I'm grabbing anybody, because obviously we can go down a few rabbit holes with the conversation, but if there are more questions, I want to make sure that we don't go through the wrong path. Fair enough. So I would say for, you know, Mary Claire, you know, determining the quote unquote bad actors, is it all just experience based, or are there conversations? How does a new developer know, like, this is not going to be a great partner for me? How can they basically build a team around them that's going to be effective in helping them gain that experience?
We've relied on our legal counsel, at times, other developers. I think I mentioned earlier, while we have had changes in our limited partnerships, syndicators folding into others, and dealing with different players at the end than at the beginning, we have not encountered, you know, what I would consider the very serious bad actors that I've, you know, heard about or know other developers who've dealt with out there. So we feel lucky about that. But I think it's, you know, every time we do an RFP, we're sort of re-upping the look at, you know, the agreements and sort of asking around. You know, I will say that, and I think I mentioned before, you know, we have taken the exit experience as a factor, not a deciding factor, but sometimes an edge factor when we've selected new partners or for new projects. You know, I can think of at least one project in the last few years where, you know, we had some pretty even responses, and we had just gone through exit with a particular partner on a couple deals. And that really resonated and sort of affected us. And we were having other conversations that were a little more challenging at the same time. So, you know, kind of knowing that, you know, the track record of that is really good information when you're making a decision about new projects.
Great.
We do have a question. Did you see that, Stephanie, in the?
Yeah, I see that come up now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where would someone,
yeah.
sorry, are you going to address it, Marshall?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take it.
That'd be
So,
great. Yeah.
I mean, I can describe it briefly if someone wanted to look. I mean,
Just quickly, Marshall, before you jump in, it's the question I just want to make
Oh,
sure
yeah,
that
sure.
everybody saw is just, where would someone get a better understanding of how equity investors look at a deal? So
yeah.
Marshall's going to address
Yeah.
that. Thanks.
And so, you could go to, Bob Moss used to always quote this. He used to say there was like 557 affordable housing events in the US every year. And when he was with us, he used to track them. And so I believe the number. So I would say that wherever you are, state, city, There is probably an affordable housing event that is occurring pretty regularly in your region or your area. I think those conferences are great gatherings of professionals like the ones on this presentation that get together and have panel discussions just like this and talk about the issues in the industry. So that's where I would start. But we're happy to try to explain it as well. Just the overwhelming majority of the economics come from the tax credits themselves, as well as the losses from the depreciation. So you've got a tax equity investor who's invested in a partnership with a sponsored GP developer that together own an asset, which is 120 units in Columbia, Maryland. And that's what you have in these deals. That's what these are. And so the asset's been developed to serve the needs of a certain income level family, and it's owning and operating multifamily real estate. That's the underlying sort of purpose. But because of the targeted income levels, there's not a ton of cash flow to go around. So you've got the credits, and again, the losses from the depreciation of the asset that flow out to the LP equity interest, and that generates a yield to that investor. So if you've got a big, huge money center bank who is paying $1 billion in taxes every quarter, you can understand where their use of tax credits, it almost becomes like a dollar. It is a dollar for dollar trade that they're making. So that stream of credits, and again, the tax losses flows out to that LP and generates a yield, an effective yield for their investment. But then fast forward to the back end, as we've been speaking about on this call, on this presentation, the asset has value, and therefore the tax equity LP would not really be, I think, doing their fiduciary responsibility to sort of, the syndicator, the fund, whatever, they wouldn't be, I think, operating in good faith if they didn't look at the underlying asset that they held. And so they have to look at that partnership. They have to look at the value of their position in the partnership and have the discussion with their sponsor partners to figure out, okay, what is my position worth, or what does my exit look like? And then we've gone down a slew of different iterations there on this call, which is, is there a relationship in play here where we're going to do more deals with the sponsor, and therefore, maybe our exit perspective is slightly different, or if this is sort of us winding down and we're never going to be in this business again and we see value there, then the discussions go a different route. So that's a really quick, maybe less than 2-minute overview of the way I see the economics flowing out of these deals and how they are evaluated by the LP equity side.
So I would just add, I think in a limited equity environment, right? Like we're calling it, like it's a buyer's market right now. And the way that they're determining which deals, right? There's a lot of complexity in the affordable housing industry. And so the more complex, more layers, we want the commercial, we want the retail, we want, all the income brackets, but there's, maybe Section 8, it adds levels of complexity to your transaction. Your experience with that complexity is a factor, right? And how experienced you are, and basically the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, if something pops up, if there's an issue, if there's a challenge, is also addressed. So as a syndicator, we basically make sure we're looking at, you as a developer, your REO, your financial wherewithal. Then we look at the deal itself, where it's located. You have two types of investors. You have an economic investor that's really yield driven, and then you have more of the CRA investor that would take less of the yield because they have the need in that area. And that's what Mary Claire was speaking to with Baltimore and the challenges that she's facing in Baltimore. And that's a lot of, that's a lot of folks, because the need in Baltimore is small, right? And so you fill up pretty quickly as a 3-year cycle. And then you get basically lower pricing because you only have economic players in the market. And so that drives a little bit of how these deals are being chosen by the investors, because right now, like I said, it seems like a buyer's market.
And I don't know if we defined CRA. We sometimes gloss over it, but CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, which is a set of rules that banks, who are the primary investors in the tax credit equity world that they have to adhere to based on their footprint. I think it's typically based on deposits they have in certain
Right.
markets, and it really evaluates how much lending they're doing back in that community. The investment in tax credit projects, low income housing tax credit projects, counts to their sort of CRA score. I'm totally glossing over a very complex set of rules here, but that's what drives the appetite for some banks, like Mary Claire was saying, and Stephanie, you guys deal with in terms of trying to figure out which markets
Yeah.
a particular investor might be interested in.
And I'd just add, CRA is filled by not only LIHTC. So, it's investing in a community. So small business lending, things like that also fill up CRA. So sometimes what you'll see is, again, competing businesses, right? And they're trying to figure out the best investment, best use of their dollars while filling up this need. So I think that's really important to kind of name for folks, because I think sometimes people commingle the two. Great. If there's any other questions, I will make sure we address them. I don't see any right now. I feel like we've covered most of the topics we wanted to cover. I don't know, Susan, if there was anything else from your end.
No, I think this has been really great and super helpful. I do want to, if you guys have any last thoughts, words of wisdom, I think it's always good to end on a positive note. Maybe something that keeps you hopeful in this work would be a great way to wrap things up while we let questions trickle in. Again, encourage everybody. You can put them in the Q&A or the chat box.
I always say the same thing when people ask me about this. I feel like it is going to be a negotiation of some time. I think we've alluded to that here. And just making sure you understand that it's not as easy as one phone call and the LP is going to go away for $1,000. It's just that's just not what's going to happen. And I think that, again, at the very beginning, we talked about how it's evolved, the viewpoints have evolved. But I don't think it has to be onerous. It doesn't have to be a big fight, but it's a process, it's a negotiation, and you need to understand the playing field as best you can as it relates to your partnership. And then also some of the, a lot of the factors we've alluded to on this presentation, which is there is a market for these transactions. And these capital providers are looking at it from a whole slew of perspectives. And I just think you need to be ready for that as on the sponsor side.
Yeah, I would just, go ahead, Shella, please.
Just because I don't want to be last.
No, please.
I would say, in terms of trying to sound of a positive note, right? So one of my mantras, I like to think of my mantras. I don't always achieve it, but I always say, when they think about you, let them think about you with a smile. I think that your credibility and your reliability as a sponsor really matters. Consider building relationships with, one or two investors, as opposed to spreading your portfolio among many investors. And then I would say, and I think Marshall said this at the beginning, that we sponsors, we are more sophisticated than we were before. We also have access to strong partners with technical skill sets, such as, CohnReznick, or, whether it's an accountant or legal consultant that can help you to craft your agreements at the beginning, but can also help you throughout your portfolio. So we have a lot more, I think, power than we might think we have. So that's how I would like to end it.
Yeah, please, Mary Claire.
Yeah, I'd sort of phrase it like I talk about the industry in general, and when I talk about to people who are thinking about joining the affordable housing world and getting in, what we do is not for immediate gratification. So just like the new developments, the redevelopments, and the year 15s, they take a lot of time. They're going to have bumps in the road, but just like many of us are here for some higher reasons than just a paycheck and day to day, is to have patience and to stick with it. And, 99% of the time there's a solution. And to point to what others said is you have valued partners and folks you can rely on who will stick with you. And yes, your reputation absolutely matters, and your good faith partnership. So my advice is stick with it.
Yeah, I would say what keeps me positive is there's a lot of smart people trying to figure it out. And I think Shola mentioned like mentors in the industry. Reach out to someone. If you've come across something before you sign anything, reach out to a mentor or someone that you don't know, but has a challenge very similar to your own. And make sure that you ask the questions, right? The tough questions of folks, and really building those relationships from a place of trust. And I think this is why Shola's getting things that a lot of people don't get, because people trust that, she's the best interest is what the tenants, and staying focused on why it is that we do affordable housing. It's not the easy deals. They're difficult and they keep your brain moving, but it's fun, and there's a lot of great people doing it. So stay positive. There's a lot of good things happening. And with that, I will pass it over to Susan.
Awesome. Oh, my camera. Thank you all. That was great and super informative. I do last call for questions. We do have a little bit of time. So Senna, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but we will be sending out the recording actually to anyone who fills out the survey. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat. It's always super helpful for us to get feedback from you all on not just, sorry, it's loud outside, not just the topic that we covered today, but anything you want to see in the future. We have a spot for that on the end as well. So if you can take a moment to fill that out, as soon as we collect all of those, we will send out the recording and the slides to everyone. But I do want to give a huge thank you to Marshall, Mary Claire, Shola, and Stephanie. This was super informative to me because I am no expert on year 15, so this was very informative, and I'm excited to go deeper because I think a lot of other topics, as we saw, can come out of this big tangled web. So we'll definitely keep in mind where some of those next sessions could take us, and feel free to drop those ideas in the survey as well. Thank you, Stephanie, for being a great moderator, keeping us on track, though, given all of those different routes we could have went off on. It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in, but I want to thank all of our attendees today for coming, for your questions and your thoughtful engagement. We really appreciate it. And again, we hope to see you next week. Hand Honors is exactly 1 week away, Thursday, June 13th, 6 to 9 at the Kennedy Center. So we'll look forward to seeing you all there. And if you have any questions, follow-up questions on today's session, feel free to reach out to myself. I will put a link to the Hand Honors website in the chat, as well as my contact information. If you have any follow-up questions that you'd like me to field to any of our panelists today, feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in contact with the right people, or hopefully get you the answer from someone. But thank you all again. Again, thank you, CohnReznick, for your partnership and your support of our programming. And I will see you all later. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.